or venture capital in general, will have 10 plays, right? 10 companies, and you're one of the 10. And they know 8 of them are going to go out of business.
There's so much activity on top of it that just distorts all of your financials.
When you start with something that's pre-designed, it just solves a lot of the downstream issues and expectations management.
The other day I said, I want to get ranked position 1 organically for all these top cities. And it went and created probably 50 different landing pages.
Everything's crystal clear. No questions are unanswered. There's no gray areas.
I think it's a story worth telling. I legitimately could say that I sold it. But I sold it for pennies on the dollar.
Sure.
To really make good with some of the people that were involved that were good people, which they were all good people. The people that I learned a lot about venture capital. You know, venture capital is horrible, right? They invest in, let's say, 10 companies. And like, I don't know anybody, like my vodka brand, we're raising money, talking to venture capital, or just raising money is a pain in the ass, period.
Yeah.
And it becomes a full-time job. So, but back then with this scenario, the venture capital, or venture capital in general, will have 10 plays, right? 10 companies, and you're one of the 10. And they know 8 of them are going to go out of business, or maybe all 10, or maybe half of them, if they're super lucky, which would never happen, that they'd be 50%. But they know they're going to, some of them aren't going to work, and people are going to lose all their money. So you get a venture capital when you're young and aggressive and like you're, doing deals, and you're like, all right, somebody is buying into my company and they believe in me. So, I had my brother, my father, I had, people, a friend put in 25,000 here, 50,000 there. That, was a lot of money for them, for sure. It's certainly in the year 2000. So when it goes upside down, the venture capital is like, the venture capital put 2 million in, or no, I'm sorry, 4 million, let's say. And friends and family put in 100,000. So not a lot relative. So venture capital puts in real money, but still the damage is that they don't really care. So when you go upside down, your friends and family and you, so I lost $1 million in that. My friends and family lost their money. And I did everything I could to hold the company together. So look, this is a good story for entrepreneurs. I morphed it into a company called eClaro. If you thought about it long enough, you might be able to figure it out, but it basically was a minority-owned business. I had a guy working for me that I hired as my CFO or COO. I think it was a CFO, or he wore several hats, but he was Asian, and there was all of a sudden this like bomb exploded, and like how do we save this? And one of them was, let's make Sung, the CEO, part owner, and call it minority owned. And it legitimately was. And we legitimately were doing a lot of programming. It was my executive search firm, right? Executive search and contracting business. So I had contractors out on billing, and we would take some stuff and outsource it to India. So it was legit a minority owned and operated business, and still is. And we were working with big companies like EDS and IBM, and still are. I'm totally not involved anymore. But so it filled a void. They needed to give certain amount of business to minority owned. I was like, the dot-com bubble burst, and we developed this cool system where we aggregate people and aggregate jobs and put software in between it to match these two databases, and then to do a bidding system for these two databases so that we get the best price for the best contractor, and the contractor gets the best deal at the best, so it was brilliant. It was all, when everything was being automated, it was like the automobile. When we went from riding horses to automobiles, it was very cool. But it fell off a cliff for about 2 years, and I'd spent $6 million. We were raising 10. We spent 6, and we had 4. We raised 4, spent 6. We were going for 10, and it was, the venture capital were like patting us on the back. You guys are doing great. More money. Spend more money. I want to see more neon signs. I want to see more of your company on taxi cabs and billboards. So it was total, counterintuitive to me. I was like old school bootstrap.
Yeah.
But this was the new world. And am I going to be left behind in the new world and be like that curmudgeon-y old guy that's like, I'm sticking to my guns? I should have, but, I was like, wow, this is fucking great. And it was exciting and fun. All of a sudden I was having fun at this business, and it was worth like millions. I had the CTO of Merrill Lynch, which is, funny, say to me, "You're going to be a very wealthy man." And I was like, "You think so?" So it was great. And look, I mean, I could defend venture capital and say they helped me have a great experience. So the problem is with an entrepreneur and somebody like friends and family investing, the entrepreneur gets a kick-ass experience, whether it's positive or negative, even from the negative. So I took all that negativity and I rolled it into my next venture, and I'm still using it. So, the entrepreneur wins, because even if they lose, and I always say, and everybody, it's like cliche now on social media, take risks. Your failures are your biggest learning tools, which is true, but I'm kind of tired of hearing it, and therefore I shouldn't say it anymore. I'd be tired of saying it, but it's very true. I learned a lot from that debacle, and my brother, who put in $25,000, didn't learn anything. He just learned, I'm never doing that again, so that's the problem with venture capital, friends and family. You don't see around that turn, because I would say I put $1 million in, and they'd be like, "Oh, okay." He put him, and I wasn't a really rich guy at all. I really wasn't. I spend every penny I make. I really do.
You had the analogy that a real estate broker doesn't run buyer escrow funds through their personal checkbook, and the real estate industry decided that was too risky decades ago, but construction has never made that decision, and that so. In other words, like I had another example written down here, but like a builder can run a $3 million of project money through their books, but they're only earning $600K.
Right.
So the $3 million and the $600K commingle. So you end up taking a bunch of money, and then you disperse most of it right back out.
Right.
And it's like when you say it, and especially when you make the comparison to real estate, it's like, this is so simple. Like, you should just be taking it. Like, ultimately, we're all, in some ways, most of us are fee-based businesses.
Mm-hmm.
We work for the fee. Now, the argument that I think a lot of people would have is, number one, well, it's like, well, now my revenue is deflated. I'm not a $10 million builder anymore. I'm a $1 million builder, and okay, well, like, there's the ego part of that. There's the lending part of that, which will come back to lending. And then, the reality of, like, most builders, like, going back to not understanding how to run a business, get into these cash flow issues, which then you get into the robbing Peter to pay Paul. And then it's just like this perpetual hole that is dug until either you fix it or you kind of just let it explode. And this, like, physically prevents that from happening, because you never allow that money to commingle.
Dude, thank God you didn't stay in Chicago. Imagine, like, dude, it'd have been terrible. You'd be like every other builder.
Yeah. Well, actually, interestingly, it's funny you say that, and I'll circle back to this in maybe a few minutes. But interestingly, Chicago is one of the marketplaces that operates much the same way. But
damn! Well, then you're fine.
Yeah, right.
Mike Connolly's.
Dude, what are the chances?
Yeah, exactly. Well, He's
like, listen, buddy.
Yeah, Mike Connolly's great. But I guess to go back to your question, Tyler, like I that was the realization I had, was that, hey, fundamentally, these businesses all across the country that don't have access to this sort of financial infrastructure are forced to operate in a way that doesn't replicate what a traditional business model should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I just continue to, like, pick away at why that was. Like, why is it that this industry operates unlike any other? And I've heard the two of you echo these, like, sentiments over the years where, Nick, you've always said, like, how it strikes you that there's no standard operating procedure. There's no standard for the way a project's, finances run. And And on the same note, Tyler, you've always expressed things that I deeply resonate with, where you're like, why is it that like we have to finance a project? Like, why does our industry accept that like we become the ones to capitalize the cost of the work and the materials to like get paid back in arrears? And I think that it was about halfway through my building career, I got overwhelmed by like all of the like totality of the data points I was seeing that suggested that the construction industry is actually missing a fundamental piece of infrastructure that all of these other stabilized industries have evolved to adopt to move money in a far more efficient, transparent, and secure way. And that's sort of where that real estate analogy comes in, Nick, because like just if you were to break it down into like its simplest form, right? Take a builder who's running, a $2 million project, right? And let's say they're a full service general contractor like we are, which, by the way, like that is how my business runs. Like we're not just like a construction manager. We are a full blown licensed general contractor. We subcontract with trades, the whole thing. Our license is on the line. We warranty everything. We've got risk on the line. But if you are a builder who's running like a $2 million project, and just for the sake of argument, you are going to charge, cost plus 20%, or you're charging a 20% fee for the service that you offer. You're a construction management and supervision. So you're going to have a $2.4 million project. And all $2.4 million is going to come into your business's financial statements. It's going to come across your profit and loss as top line revenue, 2.4, even though $2 million of it is essentially entitled and belongs to other recipients. And so when you look at the ratio of the amount of money a builder is trying to manage that is organically theirs versus the amount of money they're trying to manage that is actually custodial in nature and belongs to someone else, basically the way that those margins work is if your cost plus 20%, that you're only earning like a 16% gross margin, right? I'm rounding some decimal points here, but $400K out of 2.4 is only a 16% gross margin. And not only is the lion's share of the money moving through your business belong to someone else, but the ratio of transactions is also overwhelming, where that $2 million is probably moving through your business across, like on one single project, maybe hundreds of transactions. You're probably going to disperse it to anywhere between 50 and 100 different entities across several hundred transactions. So if you were to take like the ledger of that one project and you're trying to figure out like the profitability of that 16% slice, but you've got the other 84 piled on top of it, and your business is the shock absorber that absorbs the timing of all those inflows and outflows, like that becomes a really tricky accounting problem for even one single project. But then you try to layer on other units of business, the second project, the third project, the fourth project, and you get to the point that a builder's running a $12 million business, but $10 million is moving through their financial statements, and they've essentially become like an unlicensed escrow agent. And you're trying to see the profitability of your business, but there's so much activity on top of it that just distorts all of your financials that you have a really hard time understanding if your underlying, fee for the product or service that you perform is even profitable. And that's where like I use this term that I call the fatal funnel. So in my military career, I spent in special operations. And if you were to like, whenever we would train in like, gunfights in a room, right? Bullets would always converge at doorways, right? So if you look at like two rooms in plan view that has a doorway and there's, people shooting guns on either side, the path of the bullets form like this, hourglass type shape. And the doorway is what we refer to as the fatal funnel. And all of your tactics are designed around neutralizing and moving through the fatal funnel. Like you don't ever find yourself caught in a doorway. That's where you get wounded or killed. And I say that the shape of the construction pay chain is a lot like a fatal funnel, where builders are having to ingest millions of dollars from across a wide variety of sources that all converge on their business, that usually move in and out of a single operating account, before the lion's share of it has to get shot through to downstream recipients. And their business is acting as the shock absorber to manage all of that cash flow. When at the end of the day, they're just trying to figure out whether or not they're making enough money to pay for their own organic operating, expenses. And what I've come to find is that largely many other industries have evolved to prevent this structure from taking place. And that's where that real estate analogy comes in. Is like, imagine if a real estate broker was the financial middleman. And as you transacted a home, the funds moved from buyer to seller through the broker's business. And they're doing, $30-40 million worth of volume. And it's all running through a single operating account. And the real estate broker essentially acts as the escrow, but they don't really have the tools to do it the right way. And you could quickly, very easily see how the real estate industry would sort of devolve into kind of like a bit of a financial quagmire. Like I feel like the construction industry is stuck in, because
even that being said, though, it would still be far less convoluted and more transparent to see profitability just based on the number of transactions within that single transaction for like a real estate person, right? Where like a business, right? One job that's $2 million, you have 100 different vendors and subs that you're playing. Like on the real estate end of things, a $2 million sale is one $2 million sale. So like, yeah, it still would be an issue, but like our industry is 100 times worse than that.
Totally.
On top of that.
Totally. It's like the transactions in a construction project are way more complex.
Correct.
Like there's way more people involved. They're not static in nature. They take place over, years. They're moving up and down. It's not a static target. And I like constantly think like I've got a client we're building for right now that they purchased their property for $5 million and we're building their house for $5 million. And it's just this like perfect like microcosm of like, you look at what would happen if that homeowner moves through the real estate transaction and they acquire this property for $5 million and there's all sorts of structure around it. There's a standard operating procedure, as Nick always says, and no one is having to front the money. There's this financial structure that allows that transaction to take place in a fast, secure, and transparent way. And then you could immediately get to the other side of it where $5 million of construction is supposed to take place. And it's like the wild, wild west. It's like none of that structure exists to move money in that same manner. And as a result, it's like the builders, I feel like, that end up being the ones to bear the brunt of having to play a role they were never designed to play.
I think the struggle that we have in the industry is the expectation that we set forth for each build and how we're managing that from a client perspective. Like what would you anticipate the people who are investing in your designs, investing in your homes, like how are you managing those expectations for these clients to make sure that they're happy with the product, happy with the experience, especially when it's such a significant investment, and essentially like your online house shopping?
The first and like strongest thing that we try to coach our customers on, right, is cost. And like the entire premise of Fasten, this new company that we launched, right, is like trying to assign a very accurate forecasted cost to the build, right? Like an end-to-end cost, right? Which is, I think, unique to, well, it's certainly unique to us in terms of the offering, right? But unique in this space because, like custom home construction, like probably starts with an initial bid. And I know, Nick, that you do a ton of work on pre-construction, right? To try to like get that number really tight. But, a lot of general contractors, probably underbid because they don't spend enough time like doing diligence, and then also there's this notion of just change orders that, naturally happen within a project that result in, additional billings, right? And also add friction to the project, right? But like for us, what we found is the power of a pre-designed plan, really pushes the customer, and whether we ship them the building or whether they build it with a GC, but it like really puts confinements around the what, right? And like, it's like a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, gabled roof design. And like, that just creates a lot of certainty upstream, right? And for the most part, like, yeah, certainly there's like some customization that happens, or like some FFE customization that happens, like, you know, through the life cycle of the project. But like in the end, and we've seen this like across like hundreds of builds at this point, like people end up with more or less the thing that they started with, right? And like that is the power of a pre-designed plan. And this is why, you know, whether you're a GC or a developer or Den or a similar company, you know, like when you start with something that's pre-designed, it just solves a lot of the downstream issues and expectations management to your, you know, to your exact question, right? Then starting from like either a napkin drawing or like a brief about like, you know, an ideal cottage on a place, right? Like, and yeah, that's just an operating model that we've found to be quite successful that solves for a lot of that downstream anxiety. But it's not for everybody.
No, but it's also, I mean, the whole pre-design argument is really you're working from 100% and then you can iterate backwards. You said it earlier. It's like, this is really for that market. Like we build $3 to $15 million projects, right? Like they're custom, it's full architect led. It's just a different product. But
for sure. Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're, as you said, like you are giving access to, you know, higher quality homes and higher design homes by productizing it. And, you know, and rather than starting at a blank piece of paper and zero and iterating and then going through what we would say is our pre-construction process and eventually getting to the cost, you've essentially established the cost. And now you're working backwards with where it's like, you know, does this work or do you want to change things? And if you do, it's just a process. We did talk at length about this when we were on a call before, but since then I actually connected with a pretty high end millwork company. And they're, you know, nationwide, they ship around the US, and I had asked about their pricing model. And I said, it must be every project must be custom. And they said, no, we actually decided that we're just going to create like a set number, you know, per component. So when we're sitting in a meeting, I can look at it and say, all right, there's 17 components times my multiplier. This is what your kitchen's going to cost. And we got to talking about that for a while. And the reality is like some designs they make more margin on and some they lose more margin on. But they're able to, like, the ability to just get right to the price and be able to close that project, like, doesn't matter if they're making more margin or less margin. And I think, you know, the argument to support what we're talking about is, you know, a lot of builders, you know, forget like whether or not they're actually making the margin, but spend so much time making sure that they're making the particular margin across everything. Where it's like you could be closing and doing more work if you were faster at it.
Yes.
Where it's like the fatiguing process of like pricing is exactly that. Like the client just is fatigued through the process. We lose big jobs. It's like months of like figuring out what this thing costs, and it just it kills you. And you know, you mentioned AI, but that is exactly the use case here, where it's like, number one, you know, you can componentize this, you know, for particular projects. I would also argue, and this is a much longer conversation, that you could do this in the $3 to $15 million realm. You just, it's more work and more training up front, because everything that you do when you're pricing a job, I don't care if it's $100 million house, everything is done by like looking at something and quantifying it in time, material, whatever it is. Like there is a calculation that you're doing. And that recently someone was like, yeah, but it's like something I know in my head. I'm like, right, which you could tell, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I look at this and this is what I notice. So I add this multiplier and that's how I know how much it costs. But longer story. The productization is probably exactly that, where it's like you look at it, you basically create the baseline, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But in the you know, when you spread it across enough projects, like you're operating at a profitable company, like in a profitable way as a company.
What type of construction management software are you using, and how does it integrate in with whatever AI or even just have its own AI capabilities within it?
Yeah. So we recently just made the switch to Resio, and the main reason too is because it has AI integrated within it, and I know we're not getting too in depth, but we have created a lot of agents, and then with
All right,
agents,
what's an agent?
agents are employees. So they truly do your job. And so you can, and I'd say with all of this, and even when we're talking about the feedback Claude gives you and different other AI platforms, it's training them. So I always say, like, it's just like an employee. You can't tell your employee once or twice how to do something and expect them to go to a job site and nail it out of the park and manage a job and do all the carpentry work and everything like that. Like, you have to train an employee for years before they get to a level that you want them to be at. And you have to think the same way about when you're talking to your bot, whether that's if you're building agents or if you're just chatting with them. Like, you need to continuously have these conversations to train them in the way that you want them to represent your brand, whether it comes to speaking or completely taking over.
Okay,
So,
a bot and an agent are the same thing.
a bot, so a chat bot is what I'm referring to there. So it's just chatting with them.
Okay.
An agent is it's an employee. So just like a human being, you can set up different agents, so different employees to work for you, not necessarily on a job site, but I'll do a lot of admin or marketing or just process agents that I've set up. So I've only set up 3 agents, but
Are those all done through Claude? Like, are you
Yes.
building them through Claude
And
Cowork?
it's based on a
Claude.
specific task.
Correct. Yep. So just like an employee, if you want to hire a marketing coordinator, like you set up an agent for a marketing coordinator. You want to hire a CEO, you set up an agent for a CEO. You want to hire a virtual assistant, you set up an agent for a virtual assistant. But all that to be said, so Claude and OpenClaw is what I've used to build out my agents. So all that to be said, going back to the project management software, just all the tools in general that we use within our construction company, I want them to have open AI and to have AI or AI capabilities where they can speak to one another. And so, we're trying to have as minimal tools as we can. So we don't have, a CRM tool, a marketing tool, a project management tool, a financial tool, a design tool. Like, I want to have one tool.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same as running a job where ultimately the success of whatever you're doing comes down to communication and how efficient, effective, and accurate that can be. So finding a software or systems that can link into each other and work together to reduce the amount of communication, which essentially reduces errors, streamlines the entire setup.
Yeah. Well, and time is money, right? So it's like if we have multiple, and I'll say too, we're not quite there yet. Like we're a design build, so we still need more design capabilities, but we've now limited some of our tools that we don't need quite as many. And even the fact that Resio has, like, you can integrate to your contact form. They have a landing page for that. You can automatically put it onto your website to funnel over. They have Mason within their software. So if at any time, if anyone on our team too is trying to figure something out, I'm like, ask Mason. Or they've been really receptive to when we have feedback, we just let them know, and they immediately are figuring out how to implement that and make the changes that we've asked for. So
can we, from a very rudimentary perspective, quickly dig into what your process would look like to set up an agent? Like, hey, I want to, so many people are interested in marketing. We just had somebody ask us today where it's like, I understand how to determine who my ideal client is, what my business needs, but how am I actually executing the market aspect of that? What would that look like if you have something like Claude?
Okay, so, well, without like visuals and trying to keep this a little bit more high level. So in Claude, on the left-hand side, you at the very top, there's a chat icon, there's a cowork icon, and then there's a code icon. And so the chat is just like having a conversation and going back and forth. The middle icon, that is the cowork. And so I would say start with cowork, because cowork then, that will actually take over your computer screen and work for you. You also need to download it for your desktop, so you can't use Claude within your browser.
Yeah.
And then I always say use Chrome and do the Chrome extension. So anytime I'm on any browser, I can just hit the Chrome extension. It pops up on my screen and I can say, answer these DMs for me. And it will start answering the DMs. I can say, set up these newsletter campaigns. It will set up newsletter campaigns. I could say, something on our website. The other day I said, I want to get ranked position 1 organically for all these top cities. And it went and created probably 50 different landing pages for these top cities and general contractor. I opened Ahrefs, which is a tool we use for SEO to find keywords to be ranked for. And it automatically opened up, searched Ahrefs for what we should be ranking for. It opened up our Google Analytics. It told me where impressions were dropping, where pages used to be ranked, why they're no longer ranked. It went in live time, updated everything. And now it's giving me weekly reports too, based on these landing pages it created.
When it's working in this mode, can you go and use your computer? Is it like, it just took over my whole computer, I can't touch this thing?
So I don't, because, well, one, I'm like so fascinated by it. So half the time I'm just watching it and I'm like, oh my God.
All the time you could be saving your
completely defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are buying, mini MacBooks or little, computers for their employees so they can keep working. And so a couple of times I've like opened up a new tab, but I've just noticed like it'll glitch out, you know? And so now I've just like, because especially if I'm working on my website, like, we've spent years trying to get it where it is. So I'm like, I don't want to mess anything up. But that's why people buy new computers too, so they can like keep working and then be working on their computer.
I use Cowork quite a bit, and I continue to work. Like I have it on a separate screen. Like one of the things I use Cowork for specifically is I have it every single morning research basically daily prospects for like buying our 45 White Oak project. And so I created a whole prompt. I'm not going to read it, but it basically like will research people that are in, that could be in a position to buy a house like that. And a lot of them are tied to like IPOs or acquisitions and things, and that are just in space that are probably an ultra high net worth earner. And it will automatically open my Gmail and it drafts 5 emails a day. And I have that actually creating draft emails for like 3 or 4 different things every morning.
I'm doing a lot more on my own because, I love working with my dad. I love my dad. But I need to build something for myself. Mm-hmm. And that's ultimately what it came down to is like, I've done a lot on my own over the years. But it was like doing all this has been about kind of making my own thing and not just like, realistically, I don't see myself taking over his company.
I mean, how about going to work for somebody? Never an option, really?
No.
Yeah.
I'm just, I suppose I could, but I'm,
it's kind of crazy though. I feel like it was the same thing for me where like that was just never an option.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know how much of that is upbringing, trying to prove myself. If it was honestly like full transparency with me, a lack of self-confidence where it's like, do I know enough to go work for somebody, or would I rather try and make it up on my own and convince everyone that I knew what I was doing? Like, is it a combination of those things, or do I just like really understand that I don't want to go work for somebody?
Wow, that's you speak to my soul there, Tyler. That's I feel like I feel the exact same way. There's a part of me where I'm like, it's always the what if I fail? What if it doesn't work? But then there's also this like, I have this belief in myself. It's funny. I have like this internal duality where I'm like, you suck. And I'm also like, you're going to do amazing things. And I'm like, I've had this belief in myself, and thank God for my wife that she believes in me too. Otherwise, my belief in myself would probably be dead by now. But where I'm just like, it's going to work. My dreams are going to work. Like it's not there yet, but it's going to work, and it's happening. And then to the, working for someone else or working for myself, it's like when it came to Hummingbird, there was just a group of like-minded people that were like, all right, we'll do this together, and we'll run this together. And that's where for me, I'm like, had I gone in to be like, hey, can I work for you? Or they're like, someone tried to hire me that way, it wouldn't have worked. I think internally it's probably like, I don't know if it's maybe I just have a problem with authority, or
that
I just
definitely
like doing
plays
things
into it too.
I just like doing things my own way, or it's just, I don't know. There's so many things that play into it, but I'm certainly like, I just don't see myself. I feel like if I'm working for someone else, then I failed myself. And I know that's not the case. Like, to people listening who are working for someone else, there's a ton of benefits to that. But just for what I want out of my life, I'm like, I have this crazy belief in myself where I'm like, I'm going to achieve my dreams. But in order to do that, I can't be working for someone else. Yeah. And working for my dad, I still do work with my dad. But it's like, I need that thing that I'm building. I'm like, that's my dream.
Yeah. I feel like we talked about this when you came and saw White Oak, but the idea behind just, fully believing in what you're going after, like you said, the duality, but also be, hypercritical on yourself, and also realize that whatever, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I'm going to believe that if I put enough effort into it, that eventually I can accomplish it. And if I choose to stop putting effort into it and quit, then so be it. I'll go focus on something else. What about the type of work with Hummingbird? Because most of your career is, or at least like publicly, is like fixing mistakes and of that other people make, and now you're getting into high-end custom building. What does that transition look like for you?
So I've done a decent amount of custom builds actually throughout my career. My focus for sure has primarily been renovations, which I'll be honest, I will still do renovations, but if I don't do another renovation, I'd be fine with it. Like, to me, I'm like, custom builds are so much fun. It's like a sandbox. I'm like, oh, I make the walls plumb and square and everything's level. Whereas like you go into a renovation, you're like, shit, this room's 2 inches out of square, and I have to, I've got to cheat it somewhere. And so for me, what does it look like? It's for sure a new challenge. Have I been doing custom homes my entire career? No. But I have a good amount of knowledge. I have a lot of confidence in my abilities, and also the team around me. We've got a great team around us. We've got a great team of subcontractors. If I were going out and doing my first custom house, I'd be much more intimidated, but I feel so comfortable. When you do things in life that just feel like this is right, that's what this feels like to me. And I also have this hunger to do something bigger, and build something bigger. I'm like, so this feels like it's feeding that appetite.
What's the goal with the company? Are you guys in two separate areas and looking to expand reach? Like, what were Ian's goals with this partnership?
So right now, Hummingbird Hill Homes builds primarily in the Toronto area, the Oakville area, and the Muskoka area. So there's three big pockets of wealth in the Greater Toronto area. Their goals, I guess, would be to break into the Blue Mountains. There's a lot of money in the Blue Mountains as well.
And that's where you are, or where you work primarily? Yeah,
that's where. So me and my family, we live in the Blue Mountains. We love it up here. We moved up here back in my wife and I moved up here in 2020. So that was the goal for them, is to expand. They've expanded really well in a sense of they still have quality control. And for me, it was really important that I work with a team that cares about the same things that I care about. Like they care about the quality, they care about the integrity of their team. And it's like, I feel like being in the public eye, and you guys know what this is like. You fuck up once and people are like,
crucified.
Got him. Yeah. So it's like, you got to be really careful who you team up with. And this is one of those things where it just worked on all parts. Like we're all, like when I say a great group of guys, I'm like, there's sometimes I shake my head. I'm like, man, this seems too good to be true. And,
how big is the company?
I think they're about 50, 60 people now.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Big.
Yeah.
So, and like, if this is something that you can't touch on, obviously we don't have to, but like what's the structure of a partnership at that level when you're coming into a company that's been in existence, is a larger company? Your role is going to be more substantial than just somebody who they're hiring or acquiring. So what was navigating that process of, hey, I'm going to partner with an existing company and be an owner of this company?
Yeah. So I'm part owner of the Blue Mountains division. So that's like, I didn't come in necessarily and say like, I'm now part owner of the Toronto area and all this. So it's like, I'm really focusing on my niche, my area.
Is it treated totally separate, like separate set of books and everything?
Yes. From an accounting perspective, like a separate set of books, just because like we have to do it that way.
Right. So it's treated as like its own entity. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So you didn't buy into Hummingbird Hill Homes. You bought into Hummingbird Hill Homes.
Blue Mountains. Yeah. So being, it's essentially that I'm running and I'm overseeing everything that has to do with any build up here. So I'm dealing with clients, I'm dealing with, you name it. If it's being done in the Blue Mountains, I'm involved.
Do you have a team or is it just you?
As of right now, I have with all the PMs and everything, we basically share that load. So I have access to a great list of PMs that they already have. Yeah. We have a team of contractors that deal in this area as well.
I'm actually really curious about this structure. So you have partnership in the entity, like you own part of that entity, but you just said that you share PMs. So the PMs and like it's almost as though are the PMs 1099 or are they full-time employees?
Full-time employees.
So are you paying for them to Hummingbird Hill Homes?
Yeah. So I would build
like your division pays that division for the Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, because it would come out like if for our builds, it would come out of our cost, right? So it's not like we'd want to, we'd eat into their budgets for that.
It makes a lot of sense, like that model where it's like you essentially have kind of your central location, and then as you open a division, it's a separate books and entity, but you are always like you're tapping into the kind of main headquarters, we'll call it. Yeah. So are you also leveraging like their accounting team and things like that?
Yeah, we're essentially leveraging their like umbrella. They've built, they have such a strong foundation that I will continue to expand, and eventually we'll have our own office up in the Blue Mountains. This is still fairly new, so it's just leveraging that team. One of the things that I really love and respect about these guys is that their processes and they're so dialed with everything when it comes to the build, when it comes to the accounting, when it comes to everything involving the business side is so dialed. And that's one of the things that attracted me to this the most, was that it's just, everything's crystal clear. There's no like, oh, well, what about this? And like no questions are unanswered. There's no gray areas. And they already have everything laid out. So it's, when it comes to expanding, it was a no-brainer. It's
so funny because we talk about that all the time. It's like, you cannot scale your business, and obviously this isn't scaling just like let's do more work, let's have more sales revenue. Obviously that's one component of it, but like to be able to open a separate division and not have substantial systems would be an absolute nightmare. And like, let's be honest, I'm sure that there are certain aspects of it that are still an absolute nightmare, like it's building and construction, but to do that without having that backbone is like a shit show.